Because he was an expert in the Dungeons & Dragons game, he had thought back and concluded that if he combined the strength of a barbarian with his game knowledge, he could survive. But he was shocked not to see anything when he entered the labyrinth. Based on the game designs, there was no real need for torches because there were crystals stuck on the wall of level 1 of the labyrinth. Still, he noticed an area that seemed like the dark region, a place that was on the furthest outskirts of labyrinth level 1, the super rare location that did not have light. But the dark region was not only the starting point. He concluded that was the reality and knew nothing was guaranteed. Since the starting point was random, someone could have their starting point in the dark region, unlike how it was in the game. The status window, equipment window, character information status, inventory skill, and daily log were all not working, and that made him severely disappointed, but that was how he had expected it. Then he decided to go in another direction as there was no point in staying at the same spot. As he walked through the region, he was confused about whether he was strolling or crawling to make himself faster, but he had to be cautious just in case. Suddenly, his leg hit something, and he shouted in pain, only to discover it was a goblin trap. He had to endure it, and for that to happen, he needed to calm down. He could not let out any sound as he knew the goblin monster that uses traps on level 1 might be waiting near the area. But for him to be lucky, he thought the case might be that the goblin and Aster had gone away for a moment. Still, he knew such relieved thoughts were the most dangerous and must assume the worst possible scenario if he could not be sure of the situation. If there was a trap there, then there must be a goblin near the place, and if a goblin hears his scream and spots Jandal's son, Bjorn, who got caught in the trap, it will wait for him to lose his strength while waiting in the darkness, and that is why he must not let out any sound, as that is how Dungeon and Stone thinks. In that case, he decided to do what was necessary first. There was paralyzing poison in the trap, but they had given the barbarians only useless sandals instead of leather boots, all that had no point at the moment, and he stopped himself from whining and not moving already. If he needed to fight, it would be better for him to do it quickly, but the poison seemed to spread at that time as his right foot had already gone numb. He knew a goblin was hiding somewhere and challenged it to emerge quickly. He did not even fear the paralyzing poison, though it was a good thing. There was total silence, and he thought it all might be his delusion as there might not be any goblins there. But, even if he acted like an idiot there, he would become an idiot who survived and started abusing goblins, their fathers, mothers, and siblings. Meanwhile, he was bleeding, and it all did not stop. Suddenly, he heard footsteps coming from behind. He knew the insult was too much for it and that had lured it out, but even though he knew it was there, he still could not see it. He decided to increase his speed of running away, but the goblin kept following him with every step he took while maintaining a certain distance. When he stopped, it also stopped, which signifies that it rejoiced as its prey was bleeding and dying and was probably waiting for him to die slowly while being scared of its laugh. The goblin was clever, as it was no longer hiding its voice, and it was then that Jandal's son, Bjorn, decided to change plans. He ran but fell, which had just made the prey collapse, and waited for the goblin to come to him faster. Funnily, the goblin laughed and threw a stone at him to check if he was dead, which made Jandal's son, Bjorn, know that they were so fucking bright and were even more intelligent as compared to barbarians. He can vividly feel where the goblin was moving as it got near him, and as it was about to get him from where he had fallen, he stretched out to reach it with a punch, but it was too short. In awe and shock, his body began moving, and just in the twinkling of an eye, he had just become more muscular. His body differed from the sick body that spent its whole life in the hospital, and the goblin had adjusted to become the prey. After a series of punches and kicks, the goblin was defeated, but Bjorn was shocked to see its body disappear as if it were a game. He saw the currency being used in Dungeon and Stone, a grade 9 magic crystal, and its value was a piece of bread, and that was what he got for going through all the shit, and then he fell. The place was a world where labyrinths and monsters existed. Dead monsters would leave items behind and disappear. And in the city that was outside, there were familiar game scenes and other races that lived together, and he sensed that was the world within the game he knew of, but he would never confuse his reality by thinking it was a game. He stood up and continued his journey, but he fell again. He was still bleeding furiously as he began to stretch himself. He felt the pain of himself being fractured, but the result of forsaking a human's dignity was sweet. Since he was not using the injured leg, it didn't hurt much, and he would move faster than he had thought. The greatest reward he got was that he would no longer be stepping on traps. Now other parts of his body were hurting, but he could endure that to survive, but still, the bleeding did not stop, and it was then that he knew he needed someone to help him. He thought to keep heading in one direction and was sure he would be able to get out of the darkness. Even though he was in pain, he remembered the guy from earlier. He wondered what would have happened to him, whether he died or was awakened in his original body, and it was then that he understood why humans have religions. As a result of bleeding too much, Bjorn received a warning from the system, reminding him that the character's vitality was less than 5%, and in a moment of despair, it provided a distraction. He was told to receive treatment soon, he might otherwise die. It was getting brighter as he continued dragging himself forward, and of course, the entire first floor could not be covered in darkness, and he knew he needed a lighter area. He was sure there would be 1 or 2 people who could help, but he doubted if they would support a dying barbarian like him. He was not a beautiful human or an intelligent man. He was just a barbarian idiot who was more substantial than the average person, and with this thinking, he thought he had been going crazy. He asked himself what he would do if he kept going forward, as he knew something must be done, and it was an illusion. However, it still got back to him with him running into a monster before encountering a human. Still, he assured himself that at least he would have a better vision that time, but his identity kept splitting into 2, joining back together and getting dull again. Despite all his troubles, he knew he had to survive no matter what, but his illusion discouraged him again, asking how he would do it and suggesting that he give up so he could be comfortable. Still, he waved the suggestion away and continued crawling until he was, and by that time, he had just 4% remaining in his vitality. As he got to where there was much light, he called out for help, and fortunately for him, some people were walking and saw him. While he was still bleeding and having 2% of his character's vitality, he accomplished his character vitality, which had dropped less than 0, and his metal stat, which would be raised by 1 consistently. From his look, he seemed to be a novice to the people who saw him, but they felt something suspicious about him. If he had been a novice, he would not have gotten there faster than them. The leader called a princess, Ursina, and asked if she could treat Bjorn. Bjorn wondered if there was a princess in their party, and if that were true, then they would be pretty high level. Miraculously, he thought he would be saved but was disappointed to be saged back. Still, the priestess told them she would not treat him, and because the leader saw that it couldn't be helped, the leader then asked if another could give him, but he replied that they could only use it when there was an emergency, when they can't be treated by divine power. Still, the leader told the guy who responded to him that he already had a lot and he would pay back when they got outside. The guy agreed, and he was given the portion. His vitality quickly increased due to the recovery, but it felt like his entire body was melting, and he already knew why they did not allow him to use the potion in mid-battle. He thought he was going to die when his body calmed. They asked him how he, being a novice, managed to get there before them, and asked if he knew a secret passage they would like to purchase the information, which made him realize their primary objective. It was probably for the best, as there was nothing suspicious about goodwill without reason, and he told them he did not know, but as soon as he stepped into the labyrinth, he found himself there. This was due to dimensional instability, and the leader had heard that one could sometimes fall into the outskirts of the darkness. Though the probability was low, it only happens once every 100 years. They had a mage and priestess in the party, meaning that they were at least mid to high level, and he had just happened to experience something on his first trip that they had not even seen before. They told him he might leave and not mind the cost of the portion, but he knew that time spent within the labyrinth was as precious as gold, and it was a miracle they spent that much time on him, to begin with. He thought he ought to be happy to have survived, but it also felt disgusting to be pitied. As they went their way, they felt like the barbarian, Bjorn, was fortunate, but one of them pitied him still, as he thought he had gone through a lot from the start. Still, another one told him that if he stepped on a goblin trap on the first floor, even if it didn't get him, he would have died eventually, and meeting them had made him lucky. Though draws healed him, the guy who spoke last was talked out as he did not even want to use his potion because he was too cheap, but he told the priestess that he did that because there were tons of bastards like him. Another person asked if he had thought everyone liked him, and that if it were not for the regulations of the temple, the priestess would have healed him, and that was the reason he ought to learn a thing or two from draws, just like when he asked if there was a secret passage out of consideration. Just as they continued walking, they still saw the blood of Bjorn, the barbarian, and wondered when his blood would stop, as it had already been a while. Judging from the mentality they saw in the barbarian so far, it seemed that he was not as lucky as they had thought and that they were sure the blood would surely end somewhere. They suddenly noticed a shiny sun, and Draws told them if they had to take a shortcut, they would have to turn in the sun's direction, as it was an excellent guide for them. Draws was incredible for memorizing the entire map of the first floor. Most guides only knew the rough direction, and when they got to the gate, they discovered they were the first ones to get there and felt it was a good thing as they had hurried. As they were about to open the portal gate that would take them to the second floor, they noticed a sandal, which they thought was most likely from Bjorn. They were surprised as the distance was far to where they met him, and if they had to take the shortcut to where they met him, it would be around 15 kilometers, which he had crawled. Patsron thought in his mind that he would not have crawled out for hours without any certainty, and it was then that he realized that back when they were with Bjorn, he was holding out his right hand toward them, which was holding the magic crystal. Even after crawling that entire time, he didn't forget his trade item. Since he would not have anything else to trade, it was all worth it. They doubt if he had just been lucky, as people like him always die early, but a lunatic like him will not die unless it is a supernatural circumstance, and no matter how hard things are or how much agony they must face, they will never treat death as an escape route.